Well, at COP27, the South African government announced a climate finance deal under the banner of the Just Energy Transition Partnership funded by the US, UK, Germany, France and the EU. Now, climate activists and civil society groups have slammed the deal, saying that it is shrouded in secrecy and lacks transparency. And for that reason, they are planning to march to the office of the Presidency next week to demand accountability and transparency. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Climate Justice Coalition Secretary Alex Lenferna. Alex, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our program this morning. Talk to us about this notion that the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the deal that has been struck with these countries, is shrouded in secrecy and, from your purview, lacks that transparency that you believe South Africans need.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think it's really exciting that South Africa is embarking on a transition to renewable energy. That really is the future. It's the cheapest, most affordable, cleanest, and also fastest way to bring new energy on to address load shedding. So it's not that we're squabbling with the idea that we need to make a transition to renewables. That's clearly a good thing. But the difficulty comes when you have these deals that are being made, typically behind closed doors, made with big financial institutions, international financial institutions who, money doesn't come for free. There are typically agendas or particular reasons why one would be engaging in giving money at concessional rates or for grants. And so these sorts of discussions have been happening behind closed doors without too much transparency. There hasn't been major inclusivity of civil society or communities of workers that are going to be affected. And so the president kind of last minute announced this big sort of document that he released with the details around the plan. But, it's kind of taking the consultation backwards. He released the plan and then try to do consultation afterwards. But already there's been quite a lot of those deals that have been signed on before, that consultation happened. And so I think what we're really calling for is just more accountability, more inclusivity in that finance, and to ensure that, it's working to the benefit of South Africans and not just serving the interests of, these multilateral banks, international corporations and finance institutions.
When you talk about that openness and frankness from government when it comes to these deals signed, what does that look like? Is it enough that Parliament should, obviously, as it's mandated to do, conduct some sort of oversight over these deals? Or are we asking for more? Are we asking for public hearings where a lot of these deals are, explained to South Africans and they're allowed to give their inputs in terms of what they think is the best and the safest way to ensure this just energy transition?
Yeah, parliamentary oversight is really a must. That's the bare minimum that's required for, any major package of this sort. But when it comes to what does it mean to call an energy transition just, right? One of the elements of justice is procedural justice. It's making sure you have the right voices in the room who understand, for example, how they're going to be impacted by this. And here we can think about coal workers and communities dependent on coal, who maybe have a good sense of what support that they need. So it's really important that they're a vital part of shaping what this looks like. And similarly, when we think about, where that funding is going to go, there's this big push by the South African government to try fund, for example, polluting fossil gas, right? And I think there are a lot of relevant expertise in civil society that shows that that gas is polluting. It's more expensive than a renewable energy alternative. And so there's this worry that some of these deals are also going to be locking us in to some problematic projects that the government's trying to push through. And I think we can't forget that, the ANC does have a long history of corruption in the energy sector. And so ensuring that there's proper oversight of these particular deals so that we're not locked into more expensive polluting projects like we did with Medupi and Kusile, where we're still paying off very expensive World Bank loans. And those programs were shown to be corrupt. And in fact, Haitashi and the ANC were all involved in very problematic loans there. And, if we maybe instead thought about declaring some of those loans as odious, we could free up a lot of financial space to invest in a just energy transition. So I think there's a lot of different elements that we need to worry about and that we need to ensure that there's proper democratic accountability and oversight so that we can ensure that these deals work in our interest, are not funneled off in problematic ways to particular vested interests, and aren't sucked into the vortex of corruption that is the ANC governance right now.
I mean, something that you mentioned at the start of this, Alex, is the job-creating opportunities that lie in really getting that just energy transition program going and introducing renewable energy as our preferred form of energy. Talk to us about that, those job opportunities that could possibly be created, and if enough conversation is being had around how we can absolutely ensure that that happens.
Yeah, and the job creation potential is absolutely enormous if we do this right. I mean, the renewable energy sector could potentially create massive jobs, but I think it's important that we look at where those jobs can be created, and a lot of them is not necessarily just in the installment of renewables, but it is in the manufacture of them. And so this is why we're calling to ensure that if this finance comes through, that it enables South Africa to invest more in the manufacturing and the local production of renewables and the necessary minerals that are required to build it, because that's where we're going to see a major amount of the job creation for South Africa. And if instead what we find is that this deal locks us into us importing from, international multinational corporations that are building renewables overseas and bringing it in, then that job creation potential will be diminished significantly. So this is why, with international players kind of at the seat of this particular table, we've got to worry about whether this is them positioning themselves to, import renewable energy versus us positioning ourselves to be the manufacturers, to be really leading this green industrialization here in South Africa, because that's where we can create millions of jobs. And additionally, what we're seeing in many other countries is what they're calling sort of Green New Deal style politics, where the government invests heavily in the public sector so that we can do the sorts of jobs that are needed, not only to install renewable energy, but to do things like energy efficiency, retrofits of houses, to start building our public infrastructure and mass transit, to really start investing in climate resilience for communities through transformative programs. And that's where you have millions of job potential there too. But what we see from the government is instead a leaning towards austerity, where they're cutting a lot of the spending that would be needed to create that sort of job creation in the climate space. And I think a lot of that speaks to because we've taken on really bad loans in the past, so we're kind of stuck into this difficult fiscal space. And so we've got to be careful that we don't get ourselves further into this austerity space through taking on more problematic loans. And so that's, again, why we need strong oversight about what loans are being taken on, under what conditions, and to enable what sort of climate justice agenda.
Well, I mean, Alex, when it comes to climate change, we know that time is fast running out. Next week, you're planning to march to the office of the Presidency. What list of demands are you planning to hand over in the hopes of getting this information across and in the hopes that government will adequately respond?
Yeah, so we were planning on marching yesterday, actually, but somewhat ironically, we had extreme weather warnings in Tshwane of flooding, of lightning, and of heavy rain, so we had to postpone to later this week. It's somewhat indicative of the sort of weather that we can expect from climate change in the future. But in terms of the demands that we're making, I mean, one of the clear things is that, as you said, the climate science is really clear. We're running out of time and we can't afford to invest our finances into new polluting infrastructure. We need to be moving away from coal, oil, and gas. And so the government can't engage in the sort of doublespeak where on one hand it says it wants international finance for renewables, but then you have the likes of Minister Mantashe and the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy wanting to unlock vast amounts of coal, oil, and gas in South Africa and lock us into a huge amount of expensive and polluting gas power production too. So that's one of the things we're pushing back against. One of the other demands is to ensure that, when we make these investments in the renewable energy future, that there is more social ownership of renewable energy so that, communities can benefit from owning and running renewable energy projects, and so that also Eskom itself is able to invest more significantly in renewables so that Eskom sees the benefits of lower cost renewables rather than having to just pay the private sector and the private sector getting all the profiteering from it. And I think that's really important because we're stuck in a country with deep, deep energy poverty. Nearly half the population faces energy poverty. And so if we just hand everything over to the private sector and then Eskom is kind of struggling to make the investments it needs, then it's going to be the poor that are going to be stuck with the breaking down Eskom. So We've got a strong campaign for a green new
Right.
Eskom, which is about ensuring Eskom is investing heavily in a rapid and just transition to renewable energy too.
Right. Well, Alex, thank you so much. That was Climate Justice Coalition Secretary Alex Lenferna talking to us there about that march to the office of the presidency calling for climate justice.